So now we have explained in the Java execution model how parameter names work and how method invocations work. And this tells us the answer to some pretty tricky questions. For instance, consider this question here. Can we rename in our method definition the variable stair size to instead be n? Can we consistently rename it to n? Let's take a look at our definition to see what happens. So what we're asking here is, could we, instead of using stair size, instead use the name n? Could we go off and replace stair size by n everywhere? What would that do within the Java execution model? Well, if we look back at the one of the frames that we created, here's what would happen. So here is such an execution frame. Imagine that we've replaced stair size by n here, and stair size by n here, and stair size by n here. Then we'll see that when we come to evaluate one of these uses of the variable n, we will just look at up here in the variable section, and we will find the value 5. And so the name doesn't matter. All that matters is we use the same name everywhere within this execution frame for stair size. So that works just fine. Here's our next question. Can we rename stair size to be stepper? Well, let's go back to our execution frame to see what happens. So suppose that stair size, rather than being called stair size, was called stepper. And then the question is, if we use stepper here and stepper here, would that make any difference? Well, when we come to evaluate the variable stepper within this execution frame, we would end up looking it up here in the variable section, and we would find that its number is 5. And so stepper should work just as well as any other name. Now notice, it might be a little confusing to us as human beings because in this other execution frame over here, we have the name stepper. But this execution frame here does not get confused at all because within an execution frame, the only place where you look for variables is in the variable section of that execution frame. And since this execution frame has nothing to do with the other one, the name stepper is just fine. Here's another question. Could we replace the invocation stepper.buildStair of 5 by the two statements int n gets 5 and stepper.buildStair of n? Would that work? Well, let's take a look at our Java execution model. So here we're wondering what would happen if we inserted a new statement int n gets 5 and then replaced the buildStair of 5 by buildStair of n. Well, according to our model, when we execute the assignment statement int n gets 5, in our variable section up here, we would create a new variable n whose value was 5. And then when we come to evaluate the n over here, we would look it up here, and we would find that the value is 5. So indeed, there is no difference between saying stepper.buildStair of n when n is 5 and saying stepper.buildStair of 5. So the last question we might ask is, consider this name n here. Is there any names that we could not use here for n? For instance, what would happen if we used the name Becky there? And we'll say that Becky is just 5 because Becky would then be 5, and we would replace the name Becky by 5, so that would work fine. The only names that we are not allowed to use are ones that already exist for other variables. So we cannot use the names this or stepper for n in this case. So we couldn't say int stepper gets 5 because then we would have a conflict with another variable that was already in the same execution frame. So as long as we're not conflicting with another variable that's in the same execution frame, we can use any name we want. So the Java execution model not only explains how holes can be filled, With values, it also explains what the meaning of names are, and we see that we can pretty much use any names we like within an execution frame. And that concludes our discussion of the Java execution model to explain parameter passing in Java.